My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 27 years old, and for 5 straight years, my parents introduced me the same way. "This is Ethan," my dad would say, gripping my shoulder just a little too tight. "Our college dropout." He always smiled when he said it, like it was a joke, like I wasn't standing right there. It started after I left Ohio State during my junior year. At first, they told relatives I was taking a semester off. Then it became, he's figuring things out. Eventually, it settled into something much simpler. Dropout. At Thanksgiving, my Aunt Linda would tilt her head sympathetically. "At least he's young. Plenty of time to recover." Recover. Like I'd survived a disease called ambition. My cousin Blake, who never missed a chance to brag about his finance internship in Chicago, would smirk across the table. "Still coding in your bedroom, man?" I'd nod. Because, technically, I was. What none of them knew, what my parents made sure no one knew, was why I left school in the first place. 3 years ago, my dad's construction company collapsed after a commercial project went sideways. One lawsuit turned into 2. Payments froze. Clients disappeared. I remember coming home from class one Friday and finding my mom crying at the kitchen table. "We're behind on the mortgage," she whispered. Behind meant 3 months. Behind meant foreclosure letters. Behind meant losing the only house I'd ever known. Dad sat in the living room in the dark, staring at a stack of bills like they were written in a foreign language. "I've got it handled," he muttered. He didn't. I had been freelancing online since freshman year, building small software tools, automating business processes, fixing websites for startups who couldn't afford big agencies. It was side money at first. By sophomore year, it was more than my dad made in a month. By junior year, it was more than his company cleared in profit. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding it, because I didn't need applause. That night, I made a decision. I withdrew from school the following week. Told my advisor I'd return soon. I never did. Instead, I turned my freelance hustle into something real. I hired 2 developers remotely, then 5, then 10. We built logistics software for mid-sized companies who were drowning in inefficiency. Within 18 months, I paid off my parents' overdue mortgage. Quietly. But here's the part that stung. My parents didn't want anyone to know I was the one who saved the house. "It'll look bad," my mom said. "People will think we couldn't handle our own problems." My dad nodded. "Just say you're doing some online stuff. Nothing serious." Nothing serious. I swallowed it, because I thought protecting their pride mattered more than protecting my own. So at Christmas dinners, I let them joke. At Easter brunches, I let them shrug when someone asked about me. At 4th of July barbecues, I let my dad say, "Ethan's still figuring out life." I figured something out, though. Success doesn't silence people. Timing does. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Sunday in late November. Cold Ohio air, early sunset. My mom's dining room decorated like something out of a Pottery Barn catalog. My Uncle Robert was in town from Dallas. He was the family's gold standard, private equity partner, custom suits. Tesla parked in the driveway like it belonged in a commercial. Dad practically vibrated with excitement all week. "Robert built himself from nothing," he kept saying. "That's real success." Funny. So did I. We sat around the long oak table, turkey steaming, crystal glasses clinking. Everyone dressed like we were auditioning for a holiday ad. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "So," he said, scanning the table, "let's hear updates." Blake launched into a speech about bonuses. Samantha talked about grad school. Then his eyes landed on me. "And Ethan, you still... what was it? Freelancing." Before I could answer, Dad jumped in. He laughed. "Freelancing is a generous word. He dropped out of Ohio State to chase some startup fantasy. A few chuckles echoed around the table. My mom added, "We've learned not to push him. Some kids just don't like structure." The room felt warm. Too warm. I took a sip of water and kept my voice steady. "I run a software company." Blake snorted softly. Dad waved a hand dismissively. "Company is also generous." Uncle Robert smiled politely. "What kind of revenue are we talking?" Dad laughed again before I could speak. "Enough to pay his car insurance, I'm sure." More laughter. It rolled over me like background noise. Because here's what they didn't know. Earlier that week, my company, Vector Flow Systems, finalized a contract with a national logistics firm expanding into Texas. That firm, partially owned by Robert's private equity group. The deal was worth $3.8 million over 2 years. I had negotiated every line, but Robert didn't handle day-to-day operations. He trusted his acquisitions team. He hadn't looked at the founder profile closely until that night. Because right as Dad finished his joke, Robert's phone buzzed. He ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again. He frowned slightly and glanced down. His expression shifted. He squinted, scrolled, looked up at me, then back at the screen. Silence slowly crept across the table. "Is everything okay?" my mom asked. Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his phone toward my father. On the screen was a business journal article. Headline: Vector Flow Systems signs multi-million-dollar deal to optimize Texas freight networks. Below it was a photo. Professional headshot. Suit. Confident smile. My name beneath it. Ethan Carter, founder and CEO. Dad blinked. Once. Twice. "That's," he whispered. Robert looked at me carefully now. "You're Ethan Carter?" I set my glass down gently. "Yes, sir." The air shifted. The laughter vanished. Blake leaned forward. "Wait, that's your company?" I met his eyes. "Yeah." Robert's voice lowered. "My team closed this deal on Thursday." "I know," I said calmly. "We start integration in January." Dad stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. You never said..." "You never asked," I replied evenly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, and it was only the beginning. Because what my father didn't realize yet was that the biggest surprise wasn't the contract. It was who actually owned the house we were sitting in, and that conversation was about to happen next. The silence at that table didn't break all at once. It cracked. Slowly. My dad was still staring at my uncle's phone like if he blinked hard enough, my face would disappear from the screen. My mom looked between us, confusion turning into something else. Realization. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair, studying me differently now. Not like a nephew, not like a cautionary tale, like a peer. "You negotiated the Dallas freight optimization deal?" he asked calmly. "Yes." "With our operations director?" "Yes." "You pushed back on our initial terms." "I did." A slow smile spread across his face. "You were the one who insisted on performance-based incentives." "I don't build systems that fail," I replied evenly. Across the table, Blake looked like someone had just unplugged him. Dad cleared his throat. "Why didn't you tell us it was that big?" There it was. Not pride, not apology, just confusion that I hadn't validated them. I folded my hands on the table. Every time I tried to talk about my work, it became a joke. No one laughed now. My mom's lips parted slightly. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Isn't it?" I asked gently. "Flashbacks don't need invitations. They just show up." The 4th of July barbecue where Dad told neighbors I quit college because it got hard. The wedding where Mom said, "He's experimenting with life." The birthday dinner where Blake toasted to those of us who actually graduated. Every time I let it go. Not because it didn't hurt, because I was building something bigger than their approval. Uncle Robert set his phone down slowly. "How many employees?" he asked. 23 full-time, 7 contractors. Revenue last year? Just over $5 million. My dad's fork slipped from his hand and hit the plate with a sharp clink. Mom looked at him like she was waiting for him to say something, anything to fix the narrative he'd been feeding everyone for years. But there was nothing to fix. Truth doesn't need editing. Blake swallowed. "So you're, actually successful?" I almost laughed at the wording. Define successful. Robert chuckled softly. He already did. The room felt smaller now, not because of tension, because the illusion had no space left to breathe. Dad leaned forward. "You should have told us." There it was again, blame wrapped in disappointment. I held his gaze. "When I paid the mortgage after the foreclosure notice came in, I told you." Mom's head snapped toward him. "What?" Dad's face drained of color. "That was just temporary help," he muttered. I shook my head slowly. It wasn't temporary. Silence returned. But this time it was different. He knew what I was about to say, and he didn't want me to. I stood up calmly and walked toward the hallway. Mom's voice trembled. "Ethan, what are you doing?" I grabbed my coat from the rack. From the inside pocket, I pulled out a large envelope. I had brought it weeks ago. I just never planned on using it like this. I walked back to the table and placed it gently in front of my father. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." His hands shook slightly as he slid the papers out. At first, his face showed confusion, then recognition, then something close to fear. Property documents, refinancing agreements, debt payoff confirmations, and finally, the deed. Owner, Ethan James Carter. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. You put the house in your name?" "I had to," I said calmly. "After the bankruptcy, you didn't qualify for refinancing. The bank would have taken it." Dad's voice came out hoarse. "So you—" I cleared the liens, paid off the remaining debt, covered the penalties. I paused. "I've been covering the property taxes for 3 years. The air left the room. Blake stared at the papers like they were radioactive. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her gently, because every time I tried to talk about anything serious, it became a punchline. That landed. Dad looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not angry, not defensive, just exposed. Uncle Robert folded his arms thoughtfully. "You protected the asset," he said quietly. "Smart move." I nodded. It wasn't about ownership. I let that hang for a second. It was about responsibility. The word hit harder than any insult could have. Dad's shoulders sagged. "All this time," he whispered, "we thought you were drifting." I was building. No anger in my voice, no bitterness, just truth. Mom wiped her eyes. "We were embarrassed," she admitted softly. "When you left school, we didn't know how to explain it. So you made me the explanation," I replied. No one argued, because no one could. Robert stood up slowly and extended his hand. "You built something real, Ethan, and you negotiated like someone who understands leverage." I shook his hand. "This contract," he continued, "is just phase 1. I'd like to discuss expansion." Dad flinched slightly at the word expansion. The same man who once said I lacked structure now sat in a house structured entirely by my decisions. I picked up my coat. "I've got an early flight to Dallas in the morning," I said. Dad looked up quickly. "You're leaving?" "For meetings." He hesitated, then finally said the one thing I never thought I'd hear. "I'm proud of you." The words felt unfamiliar, not because I didn't want them, but because they arrived years too late. I gave him a small nod. Thank you. No sarcasm, no revenge speech, just calm. Because revenge isn't screaming. It's growth that makes mockery impossible. As I walked toward the door, Blake called out quietly, "Hey, Ethan." I turned. Yeah? He swallowed his pride. Can we talk sometime? About startups? I almost smiled. Sure. Outside, the Ohio air hit cold and sharp. I paused on the porch and looked back at the house. The same house where I was labeled the dropout. The same dining room where I swallowed years of quiet humiliation. Now owned by the person they underestimated most. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Because the real revenge wasn't the article. It wasn't the contract. It wasn't even the deed. It was this. They could never use that word again. Not as a joke, not as a weapon, not as a label. From that night forward, at every gathering, my dad introduced me differently. This is my son, Ethan. He runs a tech company. No laughter followed, only respect. And sometimes, silence says more than applause ever could.